Hello and welcome back. I'm joined once again by Dorian, Johannink, co-founder and business director of Silo. And today we're talking about the importance of social media in a decentralized world. So Dorian, great to be joined with you once again.
Yes, yeah, great to see you again.
Great to catch up. Now, I do want to jump in because we have seen on Netflix at the moment, the talking point is the social dilemma. It really brings to the huge discussion now of, with social media being more powerful and more important now than ever, is there more of a need now for it to have this decentralized element compared to previous years?
I don't think the need has changed. I think we just go through cycles of awareness. So it's it's great that these docos keep coming out. I think we're almost getting, like one every year or 2 years now, kind of bringing this into mainstream awareness. From our point of view, that was part of the reason we founded Silo as a concept. It was all based on, all right, there's issues with the centralized models with focusing on data capture and treating people as products. How do we create a technology that lets people communicate, ripping out all that centralized nefarious layer so that people can connect almost in a similar fashion to they can offline, where you don't have a third party in the room with a recording device. I think it's just a fundamental another step in generating mainstream awareness to adoption, because we can build these technologies. At the end of the day, it requires the mass to move onto these platforms, ones that sort of respect them more from an individual privacy standpoint, putting them in the driving seat more than the product seat.
And you mentioned there the fact that actually it's a really good point that these kind of documentaries are coming out and really informing the public, because sometimes it is quite a surprise that they are seeing such centralized, huge, multi-billion user social media platforms. And I think if you kind of turn on the news now, we are seeing in previous months, we saw the Tokyo protests, we saw the Yemen internet blackout. And then if we look into the future, we've got the US elections looming around the corner. Is this a concept that freedom of speech right now in such an online world is really important, and that does lead to really kind of the underlying importance of what we're talking about today, which is decentralized social media platforms?
Oh, absolutely. There's a few cool elements in what you just asked there. There's a couple of things going around at the moment. One is, speech aside, just what these platforms are presenting to individuals, particularly around things like elections. They're showing now that the information that two people receive is completely tailored. It's not objective, it's not agnostic, and it's really charting people in certain directions and doubling down on their opinions and their believed facts in some cases, which is quite interesting from that point of view. But from a communications point of view, it's something I like to allude back to a lot is, throughout the course of humanity, our ability to communicate in our social groups and express our opinions, receive feedback, that opinion may be wrong, or, maybe you should consider something else before it then gets broadcast into a public medium. That's been fundamental to human development and the ability to essentially be wrong, correct yourself, change your opinion, and then promote. But what we've got now is a forum where people are expressing their opinions in a widespread way that's accessible by everyone, that lives forever, which is creating quite an interesting dynamic now that, we're communicating online almost more than we are offline, particularly in the 2020 climate. We've got a whole generation coming up where the digital communications is their primary form of communication. So the ability to not be able to do that in a context where you have confidence and privacy, and the ability to truly express yourself without being, thinking, hey, where's this going to end up? Is this going to come back? Is this monitored? I think it's very impactful from a human mentality point of view as well.
Certainly, and I can imagine this is of huge interest to you. It's almost a passion, because this is kind of where the Silo application has really come into play. So I would love for you to break down to people that are watching now what the Silo community or social media platform actually provides and the concept behind it.
Absolutely. From our point of view, we've been very focused on letting people do what they do online without the downsides, without the negatives, and without the third party in the room. From that point of view, it's more sort of freedom of communication. So we founded this project on the basis that, hey, how do we not add layers of encryption and security on top of a centralized platform? We were like, well, how can we strip everything out from the middle and let these two parties and two devices connect directly? Because that's, from our point of view, that's confidentiality. Confidentiality is being able to have a direct conversation with another party and knowing who's involved in that piece. But we've also appreciated that, privacy by itself is not enough of a proposition to get people to move away from their habits and move away from using these other platforms, because they serve them so well. So for those that aren't familiar with the Silo application, it's essentially a private messenger combined with a digital asset wallet, bringing those two pieces together. It's like a decentralized WeChat in a capacity. So what we're trying to do is provide the benefits of privacy, but put a real strong experience, focus on user experience, where we don't expect you to be a hardcore privacy activist or a blockchain activist to get into this. What we're trying to provide is a mainstream messenger alternative that has the respectful elements of realizing it's a human behind the screen. It's not treating them as a product or a service. But then we bring that into the context of digital assets and value exchange. And on the back of that, we've been seeing a lot of interest and adoption, particularly in some regions like India, Philippines, Malaysia, where we've got large populations of unbanked as well. So we sort of bridge that world where you've got a lot of people that aren't hooked into the mainstream financial institutions, maybe still operating on barter systems, where they've got the capability to install an application, connect with a friend, and start transacting in a very simple capacity without the need to go through a lot of the hoops and blockers that some of these people in the populations face in these countries.
And it's really interesting that you've mentioned the barter system, because if you look at different countries that are more familiar with using, for example, phone minutes as a form of currency, compared to areas like Europe or the United States, which has a little bit more of a dependency on a credit card from a local bank, these areas are actually, from an adoption standpoint of a decentralized world or something which is a little bit more digital asset based, it seems that it's a lot more easy to onboard new users.
Absolutely. And it was actually a surprise to us. We were so focused on building the technology and releasing the app. We saw spikes in these regions, and we actually started building relationships with companies in these regions to investigate, hey, what are those key propositions, why people are adopting these pieces. And something we've realized is that we think it's going to follow a similar curve that we saw with the internet and laptops. So, a lot of developing nations didn't actually go through the laptop hardwire internet phase that a lot of the Western countries did. They leapfrogged straight into feature phones and smartphones, and they didn't go through that phase. And what we're almost anticipating is that a similar thing is going to happen in the financial markets and adoption in some of these developing nations, where it might not be that the chunks of the population end up coming up and going through the traditional financial system, but they might start leapfrogging that system and jumping straight into digital assets through user experience-based applications that let them conduct their transactions back and forth in a different framework that doesn't necessarily need to be dictated by those central finance authorities, which is a really interesting concept.
And something else that you said earlier on in this discussion, which I thought was really an interesting point, is that 2020 we have seen the need for social media platforms now more than ever, because in some countries actual physical communication is still not allowed with people outside of the household. So we are seeing this accelerated need for adoption, but also, as we mentioned earlier on, these kind of documentaries that we are seeing, which does highlight these huge centralized, very large user-based social media platforms, also might accelerate the need for a different alternative. So very interesting, and Silo kind of comes nicely into it. For people that maybe want to go and check out the platform themselves and have a little bit of a closer look into it, where can they go to maybe download or to get involved?
Just jump on your app store, type in SYLO. You can jump straight in and have a play. We've also got plenty of resources online. If you do some searching around, we dive into a lot of these concepts and bits and pieces. But jump in, let us know what you think. We've also got a pretty significant update coming in about a month's time, which we're pretty excited about. So the timing's right.
Fantastic. Easy as that, just to hop on the App Store. Well, Dorian, thank you so much for your insights. Again, it was a pleasure to catch up.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, it's always great to catch up with Dorian. We'd love to hear how you found this segment, and be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel because we'll be catching up very shortly as well, talking about future developments on the Silo team.